In the competition for the worst Roman emperor ever, names like Caligula and Nero often stand out. Caligula with his legendary evil and perversion, and Nero, renowned for his cruelty and infamous for supposedly strumming his lyre while Rome burned. Then there's Commodus, who managed to surpass even these notorious figures. Known for his erratic behavior and brutal obsession with gladiatorial combat, Commodus turned the arena into a theater of horrors, forcing untrained prisoners to fight him with ineffective weapons. From mutilating injured soldiers to orchestrating grotesque artificial hunts, his sadistic spectacles were designed to showcase his power and terrorize the masses. But what drives a ruler to such extremes? Let's get started. And remember to let us know in the comments what topics you'd like us to cover next. Commodus's militant obsession. Emperor Commodus, who ruled Rome from 180 to 192 AD, is infamous for his erratic behavior and cruelty, exemplified by his obsession with militant combat. Unlike any emperor before him, Commodus not only sponsored but actively participated in aggressive games, driven by a need for idolizing and a twisted sense of entertainment. Commodus's involvement in militant games was a clear manifestation of his obsession with the exercise of power. Donning the attire of a warrior, he entered the arena not as an emperor, but as a self-styled demigod, often referring to himself as Hercules reincarnate. His performances were meticulously staged to ensure his victory, stripping the events of any genuine combat spirit. These staged encounters were not just for personal satisfaction, they were political theater designed to reinforce his power and intimidate the public and the Senate. The emperor's opponents in these militant matches were often prisoners, including men and women who had no combat training or chance of survival. These victims were typically armed with wooden swords or other ineffective weapons, making them easy targets for the emperor. This lack of fair combat underscored the sadistic nature of Commodus's games. He was not interested in the thrill of a fair fight, but rather in the spectacle of slaughter and the excessive admiration or praise that followed his victories. One of the most notorious examples of Commodus's brutality in the arena involved his treatment of injured and maimed soldiers. These men, who had already suffered for the empire, were forced to fight him, a horrifying spectacle that highlighted his cruelty. According to historian Cassius Dio, Commodus would also engage in grotesque mock hunts, shooting arrows at helpless animals and prisoners alike, displaying his prowess with a bow. These events were designed to demonstrate his dominance over both man and beast, further solidifying his godlike image in his own eyes. A short and amusing story that starkly illustrates Commodus's cruelty is his fight against a man named Julius Alexander, a former fighter. Despite being skilled, Alexander was defeated by Commodus in a highly publicized match. The outcome was predetermined, but the event was crafted to humiliate Alexander and glorify the emperor. Similarly, there are accounts of Commodus decapitating an ostrich in the arena and then mockingly showing its head to the senators, symbolically threatening their lives. Public executions and humiliations. Commodus employed various methods of public execution that were as torturous as they were theatrical. The most notorious of these was damnatio ad bestias, a gruesome form of execution where prisoners were condemned to be mutilated by wild animals in the Colosseum. Victims, often tied up and defenseless, faced lions, tigers, and bears, providing a horrific spectacle for the bloodthirsty crowds. This method was particularly cruel, as it prolonged the suffering of the condemned, who were often left to be torn apart piece by piece. In addition to these bestial executions, Commodus was known for his use of crucifixion, a method that involved nailing or binding the condemned to a cross and leaving them to die slowly from asphyxiation and exposure. This form of execution was both physically agonizing and publicly degrading, as the condemned were left to suffer in full view of the populace. For Commodus, such spectacles were an opportunity to demonstrate his absolute power and control over life and death. The emperor's sadism extended beyond mere execution to include various acts of public humiliation and torture. Captive women, for instance, were often stripped naked and paraded through the streets before being subjected to sexual violence and eventual execution. This public display of vulnerability and degradation was designed to strip them of their dignity and humanity, reinforcing their subjugation and the emperor's dominance. Men, too, were not spared. They were often forced to fight each other to the death in aggressive contests or subjected to mock hunts, where they were hunted down and killed by Commodus himself. One of the most humiliating and torturous acts imposed by Commodus involved the disfigurement of prisoners. It's documented that he would maim prisoners before executing them, cutting off hands, feet, or gouging out eyes, turning their final moments into a prolonged and agonizing ordeal. These acts of physical mutilation were designed to elicit maximum terror and to serve as a stark warning to any potential dissenters. Use of exotic animals. The method known as damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beast, was one of the most feared forms of capital punishment in ancient Rome, where prisoners were thrown to wild animals, transforming executions into ugly spectacles. This practice aimed to entertain the Roman populace while serving as a powerful deterrent against crimes and rebellion. The condemned were often unarmed and defenseless, ensuring a gruesome and inevitable death. The method was brutal and dramatic, designed to maximize the suffering of the victims and the horror of the spectators. Emperor Commodus took this practice to new extremes. Not content with mere spectacle, he actively participated in the execution events, demonstrating his strength and skill. Commodus would often enter the arena portraying himself as Hercules and engage in staged hunts where he would kill animals and prisoners alike. These events were meticulously planned to display his supposed divine favor and prowess, reinforcing his self-image as a godlike figure. Detailed accounts from historians such as Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta provide insights into Commodus's use of exotic animals for execution. One particularly ugly example involved Commodus unleashing a pack of lions on a group of prisoners. The terrified victims, often tied up or otherwise incapacitated, stood no chance against the ferocious beast. The sight of lions tearing into human flesh was intended to shock and awe the spectators, showcasing both the emperor's control over life and death, and the might of Rome itself. The spectacle of damnatio ad bestias under Commodus created an atmosphere of terror that pervaded Roman society. For the victims, the ordeal began long before they faced the beast. The anticipation of such a gruesome death was itself a form of psychological torture. The public nature of these executions, often held in packed arenas, meant that the victims' suffering was witnessed by thousands, amplifying their humiliation and despair. Sexual violence and exploitation. In the broader context of the Roman Empire, sexual violence was a common practice, especially against enslaved people, prisoners, and those of lower social status. Slaves, both male and female, were considered property and were often subjected to their owners' sexual whims. The legal and social systems provided little protection for these individuals, allowing their exploitation to continue relentlessly. Conquered peoples, too, faced sexual violence as part of the subjugation process, with Roman soldiers often raping captives to assert dominance and control. Under Commodus, the culture of sexual exploitation intensified. Known for his evil and sadism, Commodus indulged in sexual violence as part of his broader campaign of terror and control. Though sometimes exaggerated, historical accounts paint a picture of an emperor who reveled in his power to degrade and violate those around him. The atmosphere of fear and submission that he cultivated extended to his treatment of women, particularly captive women and enslaved people. Specific instances of sexual exploitation under Commodus's rule are detailed by ancient historians like Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta. One notable account describes Commodus's establishment of a harem filled with both women and young boys, whom he would sexually exploit at his leisure. This harem was not just a means of satisfying his carnal desires, but also a demonstration of his absolute power, over his subjects, reducing them to mere objects for his gratification. Captive women in particular suffered immensely under Commodus's regime. These women, often taken during military campaigns or as part of political purges, were subjected to public humiliation and sexual violence. In some cases, they were paraded naked before the populace before being violated, both to entertain the masses and to assert the emperor's dominance. Such acts were intended to break their spirit and reinforce their subjugation, making it clear that they were powerless against the emperor's will. The sexual violence perpetrated by Commodus extended to his treatment of noble women. It's recorded that he would forcefully take the wives and daughters of senators and other high-ranking officials, using them to assert his power and humiliate his political adversaries. These women, despite their status, were not spared from the emperor's cruelty, highlighting the pervasive nature of sexual violence in his reign. Roman society and legacy. Commodus's reign was marked by widespread fear and instability. His sadistic tendencies and public displays of cruelty, such as the Militant games where he slaughtered defenseless prisoners and instilled terror in the populace. The constant threat of violent punishment suppressed protest and created a culture of compliance rooted in fear. His freakishness in dealing with the Senate and other political bodies further eroded trust in the imperial administration. The executions of perceived enemies, often without fair trial, undermined the rule of law and led to a climate of paranoia and suspicion. The economic impact of Commodus's reign was also significant. His extravagant spending on games, monuments, and personal indulgences drained the imperial treasury. He imposed heavy taxes to finance these luxuries, burdening the provinces and leading to economic strain. This financial mismanagement contributed to the instability and decline of the Roman economy, increasing the hardships faced by the general populace. Commodus's unpopularity grew as his reign progressed. His disregard for tradition and the senatorial class alienated the political elite. His self-worship and insistence on being portrayed as Hercules, along with his renaming of Rome to Colonia Commodiana, were seen as the actions of a delusional tyrant. These actions, combined with his cruelty and erratic behavior, led to widespread discontent among the elite and the common people. The breaking point came with his increasing paranoia and the resultant purges of those he suspected of disloyalty. His behavior became so intolerable that a conspiracy to assassinate him was formed, involving his closest advisors, including his mistress Marcia and the head of the Praetorian Guard. On December 31st, 192 AD, Commodus was assassinated, marking the violent end of his tumultuous reign. His death was welcomed by many, who saw it as a necessary act to save Rome from further decline. Commodus's legacy has been shaped by historical accounts that depict him as one of Rome's most authoritarian and unfit rulers. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio and the authors of the Historia Augusta portrayed him as a madman whose reign marked the beginning of the empire's decline. This narrative has been reinforced through the ages, making Commodus a symbol of imperial excess and cruelty. Commodus's legacy has been immortalized in modern popular culture, most notably in the 2000 film Gladiator. Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Commodus as a power-hungry, unstable, and sadistic ruler captivated audiences and reintroduced the emperor's notorious reputation to contemporary viewers. The film, while dramatized, drew from historical accounts to paint a vivid picture of Commodus's reign, emphasizing his cruelty and the impact of his actions on Roman society. So, what do you think drives a ruler to such extreme cruelty? Please let us know in the comments section below. And remember to like and share. Also hit the subscribe button to get notifications on the latest uploads on the channel. As always, see you in the following video.